Every American I know who has spent time in Palestine comes back angry, disgusted, and traumatized. I've yet to meet someone who says it's not that bad. It's their fault and they deserve it. I've met many who went believing Israel were the good guys and Palestinians screwed themselves over, only to come back with an entirely disgusted view of Israel. I came back in a state of shock. I witnessed in real life things I'd only read about in history books, things I never believed a government could do in modern times. I had a neutral view of Israel prior to my trip. During my trip, I was extremely skeptical and even pissed off several Palestinians with my lines of questioning. I couldn't turn on the lights or get myself, when I came back to the States and began processing everything, I couldn't turn on the lights or get myself out of bed for a week. What I saw was unimaginable. It was a cruelty aimed at a group of generous and warm people with a very, very clear intent to get rid of them. And I couldn't believe the group doing it to these people had done it to them not long ago. They took similar tactics and weaponized them against others. That is what I saw, and I can't unsee it. The children in the schools would stop me and beg me to come home and tell America to stop. They know it is us allowing this abuse. Myself and everyone I know comes back disgusted with Israel, and many of us weren't even in Gaza witnessing war. Everyday normal life for Palestinians is cruel, and it is 100% controlled by Israel. And despite what we've been spoon-fed our whole lives, it is not done because the Palestinians are violent and dangerous. It is done to rid the region of them, to make their lives so miserable they either leave or violently rise up, giving Israel an excuse to take more land. And the Israelis are not shy about this when you speak to them. Some might couch it with statements like, well, we tried peace, but they didn't accept it. It doesn't matter how they phrase it. They still end up in the same place, which is they can't stay and we want them gone. This tweet now has been seen, as I mentioned, millions of times. It has thousands of comments and retweets. And many people were able to share their own experiences when they went to the West Bank. And I want to share some of those with you now. Here's one, Myrna Schmidt. She says, I had this experience. As a Canadian, I went with a strong bias in favor of Israel. Seeing the truth on the ground changed my view 180 degrees in just hours. Here's another one from Stephanie Edmonds saying, my first ever Google search, Golda Meir. My first ever international trip, Israel. That is what good Jews do. We learn our history and pass on the tradition. No amount of Israeli propaganda can undo what I saw and experienced during my time in the West Bank. Here's choices. I had the same experience after I went on a human rights delegation to Israel in the West Bank and Gaza in 1988. I so agree that you can't imagine it unless you've been there. Here's at Proverbial Soups. Sounds like my experience. Going to Israel, Palestine is the ultimate red pill. Nobody can gaslight Americans who've actually been there. We can't unsee what we have seen. Huma Yasin, I want to add, I have been well educated on the oppression of the Palestinian people. But when I visited the West Bank myself and experienced maybe a billionth of what they experience, my blood was boiling. I don't know how anyone with a beating heart wouldn't feel the same. Fallen to Woo says, when my sister visited in 2011, her group was stopped at a checkpoint due to a ruckus. It was Israeli children throwing bottles at elderly Palestinian women, and they couldn't do anything to help. Stukas Tom says, I've talked to Greeks. This is a person in Greece, says, I've talked to Greeks who went to Israel and Palestinian territories for religious purposes, and they said the living conditions of the Palestinians were terrible and degrading compared to that of what Israelis enjoyed. Mia shares a longer post I want to share with you. This is a really great story. She says, I don't know too many Americans who've spent time in Palestine, except for my father and my friend who went on a birthright trip to Israel and decided to see Palestine as well. Their description of it is no different than what's being described here. My father is a man who was shot 7 times in Vietnam, so it's not that easy to shock or horrify him. But he was pretty shocked and horrified by what he saw there. My father wanted to see the Holy Lands, but I grew up only a few minutes away from one of the biggest Palestinian communities in America, where he was a police officer for years. The people he met in that time also inspired his trip. He wanted to see for himself what they escaped. He was surprised at how many Christians were living there, and they were treated no different than the Muslims. He didn't say, oh, well, they elected an evil government, so they deserve this. Half of them are children, and there hasn't even been an election since 2006. Newsflash, we have an evil government, and I pray that my children never have to pay for what Bush did to the Middle East. My father loved Israel so much as your average boomer before he took that trip, but he came back with a much more balanced view of the situation and with a very heavy heart. As a person who's been to war, it doesn't give him some sort of sick pleasure to watch civilians die. He understands the complex situation with how Hamas runs things over there, but he also understands that the people who live in Gaza are oppressed. It's normal to have sympathy for the children who were killed in Israel and the children who are being killed in Palestine. Not too many people out there in the real world believe that one child deserves it and one doesn't. That's sick. Collective punishment is exactly what a terrorist believes in. Natalie Smolensky says, I visited Israel, Palestine in 2008, Tel Aviv, West Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, Galilee, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and the West Bank city, Kwakilia. The country is breathtakingly beautiful, of immeasurable historic value. There are so many amazing people on all sides of this conflict living on this tiny strip of land, but the visit left me genuinely traumatized. There was no doubt that there had been a war going on for generations, which had hardened into a system of occupation and oppression. Sorry, I get emotional because I saw it with my own eyes, and it was horrible. Natalie's testimony of what she saw. She said, I was in East Jerusalem, which was then Palestinian territory on Israel's Independence Day. I watched packs of young IDF soldiers parade through the streets, automatic weapons out, fingers on triggers, singing nationalist songs. Palestinian shopkeepers shuttered their shops in fear of being killed or robbed. Soldiers who were known to just bulldoze through stores, taking whatever they wanted. Many Palestinian shopkeepers had pictures in their shops of relatives, including children, who had been killed in the conflict. The marching IDF soldiers were accompanied by plain-clothes Israelis, also carrying automatic weapons, also fingers on triggers. You couldn't tell if these people were cops, undercover military, or just ordinary people. There was a sense that violence could erupt at any moment. This set the tone for the rest of the trip. I saw that Palestinian life was mirrored by a network of checkpoints and ID requirements that in effect ground social and economic life to a halt. If you were a Palestinian living in the West Bank, you needed a Jerusalem ID card to go to that city, which was probably only 30 minutes or an hour away from where you lived. If you were Palestinian and out of the country for more than 45 days, the Israeli government could simply revoke your Palestinian ID card, meaning you couldn't get back in to your own country and you weren't a citizen of Israel anyway. For this reason, many Palestinians were afraid to travel. Palestinian students couldn't attend Israeli universities. About 20% of Palestinians and 40% of Palestinian men had been in prison, and almost all of those imprisoned, 90 to 95%, had been tortured. Palestinians had to wait hours-long lines to pass through checkpoints to go to work or to the hospital. They could be turned away for any reason, which meant they would not be able to get to work or get medical treatment that day. Pregnant women were often forced to give birth in their cars or on the road because they couldn't get through checkpoints in time. People regularly died waiting in checkpoints. The road system was also segregated. Some roads were for Jewish people only, unless they were settlers in specific communities. Most Jewish Israelis were not allowed to go to the West Bank or Gaza to see the effects of the occupation themselves. The separation fence ostensibly means to separate Israel from the Palestinian territories, also cut many Palestinian towns in half, forcing families and neighbors to go through an arduous checkpoint process just to see one another. In the West Bank city of Quiquilia, my friends and I saw an above-ground sewer that had bars placed on the opening so that people couldn't even use the sewers to quickly get to a hospital, which was in a different city. In the Palestinian village of Nazareth, where Jesus is believed to have grown up, my friends and I visited beautiful churches. We spoke with many ordinary Palestinians, both Muslim and Christian. I bought a bottle of the olive oil made in the town. It tasted exquisite. You have to help us. You have to help us, said the woman selling me the olive oil, pleading with her eyes. I will remember that forever.
Can this give us a valuable opportunity to engage in a thoughtful exchange of ideas and perspectives? Can we agree about the points that are expressed here? If not, why not? Thank you all for your comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.